Federal investigators are preparing to file criminal charges against Senator Robert Menendez, a New Jersey Democrat who has been under investigation for possible corruption, according to people familiar with the inquiry. The Federal Bureau of Investigation has been investigating Mr. Menendez for more than 2 years, these people said. The timing and specific charges weren't immediately clear. The investigation has focused on the senator's financial connections to a Florida doctor and close friend, Dr. Solomon Malgan, who is facing a probe into his billing practices. The FBI has examined whether the senator improperly sought to help the doctor in that inquiry and whether Mr. Menendez may have improperly used his influence with the Department of Homeland Security on behalf of the doctor on an unrelated issue, according to people familiar with the investigation. The probe originally centered on the senator's travel to the Dominican Republic with Dr. Malgan and whether the senator might have visited prostitutes during such a trip. After months of investigating, the FBI was unable to substantiate the prostitution claim, according to people familiar with the case, and women later told local police they had been paid to make up the story. In a statement, Tricia Enright, a spokeswoman for Mr. Menendez, said, "We believe all of the senator's actions have been appropriate and lawful, and the facts will ultimately confirm that. Any actions taken by Senator Menendez or his office have been to appropriately address public policy issues and not for any other reason." A lawyer for Mr. Menendez declined to comment. Last year, Mr. Menendez's lawyer asked the Justice Department to examine intelligence suggesting the prostitution claim had been an elaborate smear by agents of the Cuban government. Mr. Menendez is an outspoken critic of the regime. A lawyer for Dr. Malgan didn't immediately respond to a request for comment Friday. Dr. Malgan's lawyer has previously said he acted appropriately at all times. Mr. Menendez, who was re-elected in 2012 and is currently the top Democrat on the powerful Senate Foreign Relations Committee, has been one of his party's most outspoken critics of two of President Barack Obama's signature foreign policy initiatives: a thaw in relations with Cuba and negotiations with Iran over its nuclear program. Mr. Menendez has advocated for more stringent sanctions on Iran, though he agreed in January the administration should have more time for talks. And he has said Mr. Obama's deal with Cuba rewards the ruling Castro brothers while doing little to advance human rights. At an event in South Carolina with Mr. Obama on Friday, Attorney General Eric Holder declined to comment on the possibility of charges against Mr. Menendez. The likelihood of charges was earlier reported by CNN. The details of the investigation were laid out in the filing with the Federal Appeals Court in Philadelphia that was briefly available online last week before being placed under seal. The New Jersey Law Journal subsequently reported that the filing showed a grand jury has been investigating Mr. Menendez for official actions he allegedly took on behalf of and gifts he received from his close personal friend, Dr. Solomon Malgan. The government says Mr. Menendez and his staff advocated on Dr. Malgan's behalf in the June 2012 meeting with Marilyn Taverner, then the acting administrator of the Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services, or CMS, and at an August 2012 meeting attended by Mr. Menendez, then Senate Majority Leader Harry Reid, and then Secretary of Health and Human Services Kathleen Sebelius, according to the court filing. Dr. Melgen is a prominent eye doctor and longtime friend and donor to the senator. He has given hundreds of thousands of dollars to Mr. Menendez and in support of Senate Democrats, according to election records. The probe into Dr. Melgen focused on whether the doctor overbilled Medicare for eye procedures. Aides to Mr. Menendez have said the senator pushed CMS to clarify its rules after Dr. Melgen became involved in a billing dispute with the agency in 2008. Aides said Mr. Menendez didn't advocate on behalf of Dr. Melgen specifically, but urged the agency to clarify its policy generally. Separately, according to people familiar with the matter, Mr. Menendez pressed Homeland Security officials in 2013 not to provide cargo screening equipment to the Dominican Republic, a position that stood to benefit Dr. Melgen because he controlled a private company with a competing plan to screen cargo in the Dominican Republic. Aides to Mr. Menendez have said his only motivation in raising questions about Dominican security was to keep ports secure and prevent the flow of drugs or other contraband into the U.S. After the investigation began, Mr. Menendez paid Dr. Melgen back nearly $60,000 for 2 round-trip flights on a private plane to the Dominican Republic, trips that the senator didn't initially report on disclosure forms, aides have said. The previously unsealed court filing also said the FBI is probing actions taken by Mr. Menendez's staffer in connection with Dr. Melgen's efforts to provide border screening equipment for Dominican ports. In the legal fight that is the subject of the court filing, 2 Menendez staffers sought to avoid testifying to the grand jury about the matter by invoking the Constitution's speech and debate clause, which generally protects members of Congress and their staffers from being questioned about legislative acts or the motive for legislative acts. The appeals court said staffers did have to answer some questions about those matters, but said the lower court judge must also probe deeper into the content of the conversations with staffers to better understand whether the discussions are protected by the speech and debate clause.